I want to hand the microphone over to you and just drop some knowledge bombs on us in regards to viruses. What do we need to know?
Here's the biggest knowledge bomb. I was reading a report recently that talked about the sort of evolution of viruses, and basically they talked about how it's possible that when cellular life as we know it, and even pre-cellular life as we know it, sort of developed, things like viroids, for example, are not quite viruses, right? They're like strands of RNA. And it's thought that there was a pre-DNA world, an RNA world, and that viroids are basically like a relic of that era of life history. And viruses, though, perhaps, especially RNA viruses, they may have been like the first things that became like what we now think of as the nucleus of cells. It's possible that as like a genetic component, viruses are basically, part of us and have been for the entirety of cellular life on Earth. Knowledge bomb. But so what I'm trying to say here is that we shouldn't be surprised that there are various kinds of viruses out there. Some of them are detrimental, obviously, but actually a lot of them are either neutral or even beneficial for their hosts. Some of them exist inside our genome as retroviruses. Some of them can escape or genetic codes that escape from other cells and things like that. So that's a little bit high-minded, but I think it shows contextually exactly what we're dealing with here. These organisms or not organisms that are like quasi-life, and they're around, and they basically work like molecular additions, basically. And so bringing it down to IPM, though, we have things like viroids that are a huge pain for exactly that reason. It's because things like hop-latent viroid, they're basically strands of genetic code that our cells, or in this case the plant cells, they take and they go, oh, this is plant RNA, let me replicate you. And by replicating the RNA of the viroid and not everything else it's supposed to do for the cell, you get these weird things like stunting, chlorosis, other kinds of weird damage, because you have these oddball genes that are just not being expressed in the plant, which are very important. And so viruses also, they can do things weird, like you've got these recombination viruses where their genome is split up into different chunks, and they move between different plants and then recombine with each other. It's very fascinating, and unfortunately there's not a whole lot of conventional solutions for viruses because they're basically genetic code, and it's very hard to target genetic code without targeting the plant's code too.
It's pretty scary. Once I heard particularly about hop-latent viroid being identified at 73% of commercial facilities in the U.S., it just kind of blew my mind. And the fact that in California alone, 90% of facilities, medicinal plants tested positive for hop-latent viroid. So I can only imagine the amount of people that have hop-latent viroid in their garden and don't know it. And they are seeing deficiencies, seeing plant problems, and trying to figure it out, but it's really a viroid, which they really can't do anything about. So it's really scary. I know it comes it can be within the seed, it can be transferred in water as well. Next week, the guest that's coming on this podcast is going to talk all about hop-latent viroid. So you guys stay tuned for that one. That's going to be real in-depth, all about hop-latent viroid, and I'm looking forward to that conversation. Now, is there any other viruses or viroids besides hop-latent viroid that's kind of worthy of mentioning and keeping an eye out for?
Yeah, so I want to say one thing about hop-latent viroid in particular is that it was recently found that other plants, like we give viruses these names, typically the first host we find them in and a symptom that they have about them, like tobacco mosaic virus, right, for example. So hop-latent viroid, right? And what's interesting, though, is that hop-latent viroid has been found in things like tomato, sunflower, cucumber, and its ability to transfer from parent to offspring through seed. And other older research was kind of low. In newer research, it's showing really high transmission rates vertically from parent to offspring. So it can be not just in hop, it could be in other plants too that you might be growing in your garden. It could be in other commercial plants that are being sold right now. They're not being tested. So that's just a thing to consider. So I would definitely check out that viroid video upcoming. There's a lot of information that we should be kept up on. Other viroids, though, there are stunt viroids in other kinds of plants. Citrus gets a viroid, for example. That's pretty common. Peanut, for example. But there's also viroids that have been found in the human oral microbiome, or at least viroid-like things. Recently, it came out these so-called obelisk-like viroids that were found in the bacteria in our own mouths and in all the continents on Earth. They went through and they categorized the genetic structure of these obelisks, and they found them in human samples. So we even have viroids in and around ourselves too, it seems like. And as our ability to sequence and look in finer and finer detail increases, we'll probably be able to find more and more things like that. Generally, though, I mean, like there's some viruses that are going around right now in tomato that are a huge deal. Ring spot virus, for example. There are, I guess another big one that people are dealing with a lot is B. curlytop virus. Very common. A lot of people know about it. It's spreading all throughout various medicinal plants in the USA and abroad. It's vectored by the beet leafhopper pretty much solely. And we have found that viruses that are like 95 to 98% the same as like BCTV we find in tomatoes and peppers in the area, they're coming back very similar. So it means that these beet leafhoppers are going into crops and they're taking up the virus, and then they're moving into medicinal crops and other plants, and also plants that are just living around in the environment. And they act as reservoirs. And so if you live in these areas like Nevada and Arizona and other places where BCTV is very common, or Colorado, then you should be aware of that and have some plans for finding the symptoms, which is usually like a stunting in the leaves and a curling of the leaves and chlorosis as well. But if you suspect, you should definitely get it tested to find out if you can. Because then you know that probably you won't be able to find a solution, unfortunately, and then you should use your resources for something else.
This clip is brought to you by AC Infinity. Use discount code MrGrow at 15 to save on any of their products.